You know that?
Yeah.
You've seen that?
Yeah.
Can you fix that?
No.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the first trailer for Loki Season 2. We have so much to break down in this trailer. Small details you missed, theories about what the hell is going on here, and how all of this is leading up to the culmination of the Multiverse Saga in Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. Also, throughout this trailer, pay attention to the recurrence of circles and loops. During Loki Season 1, we put out one of my favorite ScreenCrush videos of all time, about how Loki the character is stuck in circular loops. His own evil impulses keep putting him in the same situation.
I trust you. You betray me round and round in circles we go.
Now this was manifested in Season 1, when Loki's punishment was to relive his worst memory over and over again. This is also like the Loki in Norse mythology, because Loki ultimately starts off the chain of events that leads to Ragnarok, causing the end of the world and the world to be reborn so the whole process can start again. And if you recall, this is exactly what happens to all the timelines in Loki Season 1.
Wait, so what happened in Loki Season 1?
Alright, so here is a quick recap of what went down in Loki Season 1 and just bits of Quantumania in case your memories are a little fuzzy. After being pruned, we saw Loki and his variant Sylvie enter the void at the end of time. There they defeated the time-eating beast Alioth and entered the Citadel at the end of time, where they meet the Kang variant, He Who Remains.
This is wild.
So this version of Kang explains to Loki and Sylvie the ins and outs of the sacred timeline and the multiversal war that preceded it. Now this version of Kang went to war with his other variants and won. He then used Alioth to prune trillions of realities from existence and create the sacred timeline, a circular flow of time only allowing for a few realities to exist. If anyone ever veers from the predetermined path, they're arrested by the TVA and their reality is pruned. That is how this particular variant of Loki has found himself in this situation. You see, after the Avengers time heist in Avengers Endgame, we saw Loki escape with the Tesseract, causing a variant timeline to begin to branch. Loki was arrested by the TVA and his timeline was pruned. Anyways, He Who Remains explains to Loki and Sylvie that if variant timelines are not pruned, then variants of himself will rise and the multiversal war will happen again. Sylvie doesn't buy it and wants to kill He Who Remains for committing what she views as mass genocide. But Loki fears what will happen if the timeline is left unchecked. They begin to duel and Sylvie gets the upper hand, sending Loki back to the TVA. She then kills He Who Remains and the sacred timeline devolves into madness. And then He Who Remains says,
See you soon.
Loki runs to find Mobius and explain what has happened, but soon realizes that Mobius has no idea who he is, implying that time has either been rewritten and Mobius and Loki never met, or Loki was pushed into a different TVA. And then, in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, we meet the Kang the Conqueror variant, who we've theorized is likely destined to become He Who Remains in the future, because they both share the same goal of wiping out all their variants and establishing one sacred timeline. In the post-credit scene of Quantumania, we meet these other variants in what's called the Council of Kangs, and we see what was once the sacred timeline now in complete chaos and referred to simply as the multiverse.
They're beginning to touch the multiverse.
We also find out that these Kang variants control the multiverse. Now, given that we saw a statue of Kang at the end of Loki Season 1 in this new rewritten TVA, it is highly likely that the Kang Council controls the TVA in Loki Season 2. Now, if you look closely here... Doug, are you stress eating again?
Yeah, I can't help it. I just really get wound up sometimes.
Dude, you can't stress out like that. It's not healthy.
But you used to stress eat all the time, and I once saw you eat a cake. A whole cake.
Yeah, but I kicked my oral fixation habit with this little guy. It's called Fume.
Oh, is that a vape?
Nope, it's not a vape. This is a naturally diffusive device called Fume. They're the sponsor of this video. So this uses plants and behavioral science to help you trade out your negative habit for a positive one. It tastes really nice and is completely harmless. Like look, it's not even electrical inside. And instead of pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals like a vape, Fume uses these plant-based cores that are infused with natural flavors like orange vanilla and raspberry lemon. Plus, it has adjustable airflow and is designed with these movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for calming my anxiety.
I don't even have fingers, and that sounds great.
Right? So, Fume is helping me turn my negative habits into positive habits. It makes switching easy and even fun. They have thousands of 5-star reviews from more than 100,000 customers who have used Fume to change their lives, and they've switched when other solutions just didn't work. So, head to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush and use the code ScreenCrush to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. The Journey Pack comes with 3 unique flavors and everything you need to finally be free of your bad habit. That's tryfum.com and use the code ScreenCrush to save an additional 10% off your your order today. Now, back to what I was saying. So in this opening shot, the trailer already tells us so much about the series. Notice how this doorway is a circle, but also it looks like a keyhole, because this season is about Loki and the others trying to unlock this mystery, to pass through the barrier and stop all these variants of Kang. The poster here on the right is about taking good care of your temp pad. Now remember, temp pads are the devices that the TVA uses to open up portals so they can travel throughout time, while the one on the left is about the pneumatic tubes that we see all over the repair shop.
Pneumatic tubes, like the ones at the bank drive-thru?
Yes, that's right. In the old days, office buildings used to send memos or mail using these tubes. So all around the repair office, we can see pneumatic tubes and pieces of paper where people have sent their repair requests to be processed. Now it's interesting to see the little changes throughout the TVA after the Sacred Timeline exploded. There's the statue of Kang, of course, which is a whole other thing that we'll talk about in a bit, but also we don't see any of the same posters from Loki Season 1 about pruning the timeline. It's almost like that when the Sacred Timeline was destroyed, the TVA was rebuilt by a different architect, Kang the Conqueror, or the Council of Kangs. And then, hey look, it's Academy Award winner Ke-Huy Quan starring as OB. Now, OB is likely short for Ouroboros, or the snake that is eating its own tail from mythology. That is another loop that symbolizes an infinite cycle, just like the infinite cycle that He Who Remains spoke about.
An infinite amount of me start another multiversal war, and I just end up right back here anyways.
Also, OB has an Ouroboros symbol on his jumpsuit. Now this is really cool because Mobius is named after another symbol of infinity, a Mobius strip, the mathematical representation of a time loop, just like the one we saw in Avengers Endgame. An Ouroboros is also a circular symbol meant to represent a snake consuming its own tail. Now this symbolizes a never-ending cycle of creation and destruction, just like that of the Sacred Timeline. This is also a fun nod to another entity in Norse mythology, the world serpent called Jorgnemungr. Jorgnemundr was the son of Loki and encircles Midgard or Earth, biting its own tail, a mythological Ouroboros. Now Mobius has taken Loki to the repair shop because he is glitching.
That's what's been happening. Wow. Time slipping. Wait, you know that?
Now, at first, I thought this was like how variants glitched in Across the Spider-Verse movies, but look closely. This looks very much like what happens to Scott Lang in Quantum Mania when he was trapped in a probability storm.
Yeah, what was that again?
So this is where Scott was recovering Kang's power core, and it was surrounded by this probability field. Essentially, the power core created an area where every possible decision Scott could ever make was manifested at the same time, until all the Scotts could agree on one thing: saving Cassie. Now, the reason the power battery created a probability storm is because Kang uses this device to travel through the multiverse, so it has to calculate all these possible timelines in order to chart a course.
But what does that have to do with Loki?
Well, think about it. Loki was present when the Sacred Timeline split off into the infinite multiverse. He was at the center of a different kind of probability storm, so now he is kind of many timelines all at the same time. He comes from the old universe, and now he's part of the new universe. So he is the ultimate anomaly, existing in several places at once because he is slipping through the cracks of time, a time slip, if you will. They say
It's impossible to time slip in the TVA. I know, but we just saw it happen.
and this is a big clue about what the hell is happening in this show. The TVA is supposed to be immune from the effects of time. It is a totally neutral point that is not affected by the outside flow of time, sort of like how the center of a record has no interaction with any of the tracks around it. But after Sylvie killed He Who Remains, it means that He Who Remains never existed. So that means that He Who Remains never created the Sacred Timeline, and he never created the TVA. So that would mean that someone else formed the TVA.
Who?
Well, I think that in this new reality, the TVA was probably created by the Council of Kangs that we saw at the end of Quantumania. Remember, He Who Remains killed off all of his variants and formed the Sacred Timeline just to stop that council from ever forming. But with him gone, the council would have formed their own version of the TVA to govern reality for themselves. This new TVA would still prune other realities, except they would prune realities that could threaten the authority of the Council of Kangs. And because Loki was present in the Citadel when reality was rewritten, he is the only person who remembers the events of Season 1. Well, him and Sylvie.
Oh, I got you. Okay, thank you.
Now notice in the repair shop we see circular fans and a very large clock with multiple hands, like the clock we saw in the credits of Season 1. Again, we see a recurrence of circles throughout this trailer. And then Loki time slips into the time theater on level 5. This is even the monitor where Mobius looped the film strip through in episode 1. Now slow this down for a moment, you'll see that for a moment Loki has multiple limbs at once, just like the multiple Scott Langs that existed in Quantumania. We cut to him in front of a wavy arms man making the same gesture as him. And then we see that he is in front of a jet ski shop. Remember, Mobius is obsessed with jet skis.
That magazine.
Yeah, the one on jet skis.
Yes. Why'd you have that?
Because they're awesome.
And what do you want to bet that inside this shop there is a variant of Mobius who works in his original timeline selling jet skis.
There was a beautiful union of form and function, which we call the jet ski.
And then we see Loki next to a poster about healthy timelines that is framed like an old school poster about eating a healthy diet. Now for the TVA, a healthy timeline used to mean a timeline that did not diverge too much from the sacred timeline. When a timeline started to diverge, it approached the red line, a point where it created a new universe that could then create a new version of Kang the Conqueror. In fact, this poster to the left of Loki warns about redlining. And then we see Loki run into himself.
Hello?
This, again, is like Scott in that probability storm, except now Loki is splitting off into different versions of himself that could have made slightly different decisions. And notice on the monitor behind him, this is something new. This is the monitor where last season the TVA would watch the timeline split off as they approached the red line. But now we see the sacred timeline is hitting this point where it suddenly has this energy burst and splits off into several directions at once. This would be the threshold, the point in time where Sylvie stabbed He Who Remains and the multiverse exploded at the end of Loki Season 1. Remember this visual because we're going to see it again in just a bit. Now notice this other version of Loki is reading a TVA manual with a cover that looks a lot like a Gideon Bible. Appropriate since TVA workers are essentially religious zealots who believe that they work for gods, the timekeepers. But also, maybe this means that this version of Loki just materialized, saw what was happening in the timeline, and then picked up this manual to figure out what the heck is going on. And then we cut to Sylvie working in a vinyl record shop. Now here again, we see the motif of circles and loops. See, records are like the sacred timeline. They may be in a loop, but the track of a record has a single groove that tells a story in a sequence, like an individual timeline. But just like how the TVA can hop around in time, we can move the needle to different parts of the record.
Hey, what record is that?
Why, this is a record of the story of Star Wars, which I have had since I was a kid.
Oh, that's awesome. High five.
But here we see that the records are becoming unraveled, just like the probability storm that split Scott in so many directions. So it's likely that Sylvie is also time slipping because she was also present when the sacred timeline was destroyed. This poster behind her reads Camouflage in Concert, and Camouflage was a band in the 1980s, the same time period where this movie premiere takes place, but more on that in just a bit. Now, we see Sylvie in two locations, in a record store and working in a McDonald's, and both locations seem to be in the 1980s. In the McDonald's, she looks confused, like maybe as she's time slipping, she's entering different variant timelines of herself. But I think it's more likely that after she killed He Who Remains, she turned down his Willy Wonka offer to run the factory for him, and instead she tried to settle down in a time period that seemed fun, the 1980s. But instead, she sees this timeline unraveling around her. Now here is another key moment where Loki uses the pruning rod on a mural of the timekeepers.
There's nothing to stand between this world and utter destruction.
Remember, the TVA uses pruning rods to send variants to the void at the end of time, where they are consumed by a giant fog monster called Alioth. Now, Alioth was created from the cracks between time that resulted from the Multiverse War, and He Who Remains was the one who learned how to weaponize Alioth.
I weaponized Alioth, and I ended the multiversal war.
So it's actually kind of unclear if Alioth, or even the Void at the end of time, even exist in this new multiverse. It could be that the Council of Kangs has now weaponized Alioth to prune people who are a threat to them. And we saw a similar Timekeeper mural in the courtroom in Season 1. So this is interesting because we see a statue of Kang in the TVA, but there are still murals of the Timekeepers. Either there are different TVAs, or this is all a big mass of timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly goo. When Loki prunes the wall, we see the real architects behind this new TVA. The Council of Kangs. This one on the left looks like Ramatut, while the one on the right looks like Immortus. You know, these guys.
If it wasn't true, I wouldn't call you.
Must really eat you up that you're not the one who killed him.
None of us killed him.
Notice that as Loki does this, we see a hand on the left-hand side of the screen. This is probably Mobius. Remember, at the end of Season 1, he did not remember Loki.
Take it easy. You're an analyst, right? What division are you from?
What are you talking about?
Who are you? What's your name?
And in the Quantumania post-credit scene, we saw Loki still trying to explain this situation to Mobius.
Made him sound like this terrifying figure.
He is.
So here we see Loki, probably early in the first episode, showing Mobius the real power behind the Timekeepers. Notice also that there is a severed robot head in the foreground, much like the false heads of the Timekeeper robots. Maybe in this new TVA, the judges are robots and Loki had to decapitate one of them to show Mobius the truth. And then Mobius and Loki go on another buddy adventure just like in Season 1. Now I think we see them arrive here in two different timelines. This one looks like the Old West and this one is at a World's Fair in France. I think it's two different ones because we see them walking away from two different time portals. At least, I think this is France, by the way. This sign reads Midway in English, and this one means place in French. So like I said, this looks like a World's Fair. Now, World's Fairs have kind of gone out of style, but different cities used to host them every single year. It's where countries and companies would put up displays to celebrate themselves. It was a way to visit the world without actually leaving home, kind of like how the TVA can visit all time and places at once. And notice that the centerpiece of this fair is a Ferris wheel, a large circle that moves in loops, just like how Mobius described the flow of time.
That's the proper flow of time, and it happens again and again and again because it's supposed to, because it has to.
And like the time loop created when He Who Remains died.
See you soon.
So this World's Fair scene is setting up the appearance of Victor Timely that we saw in Ant-Man 3's post-credit scene. This showed a variant of Kang calling himself Victor Timely, building an old-fashioned time machine. Now, Victor Timely is from Marvel Comics. He is a version of Kang who traveled back in time to become an inventor in Timely, Wisconsin. And here, I think it's likely that this is the version of Kang the Conqueror that we met in Quantumania. He was sucked into his time vortex, stranded in the past, and now he's trying to create a machine to set himself free. In fact, we see Loki shooting someone who might be Victor Timely with these green energy bolts, which is a new power for him that I'm going to explain later on. Now, this guy they confront in the alley is the same actor we see arrive at the movie premiere, where a person is holding up a sign that reads, "Marry me, Brad Wolf." And guys, this is a ridiculously deep cut. First of all, judging by the fashion, the cast, and the movie poster, we think this takes place in the 1980s, the same time period where Sylvie is living, so maybe this could be where she meets up with Loki.
So wait, who's Brad Wolf?
I'm getting to that. In the 1980s Thor comics, he was an actor portraying a villain called the Zaniac, the same name as the movie playing here. But then Brad Wolf became possessed by the actual spirit of a real demon spirit called the Zaniac. It also looks like there's something else about him. Maybe he's a variant, because later on we see him trapped in the TVA. And then we cut to Mobius getting a key lime pie in a place that we later see is the pie room. They sell nothing but pies there. Now, pies of course are also round, but these are also all key lime pies. This could be a pun on the name Loki, or it could be important that all the pies are green, just like the color of Loki's energy blast. Now, it is interesting that as the sacred timeline is splitting off and creating all these different variants, the TVA is still serving only one kind of pie. I think there's going to be something to that that's symbolic later on.
Is that symbolic?
Later, we see that Sylvie is with them in this same pie room. Now, all through season 1, we saw Mobius take his time, going to the break room, having a meal. So it makes sense that to figure out this crisis, he would first want to take Loki and Sylvie to the pie room. And then we see Hunter B-15. Now remember, this was a TVA worker who looked down on variants like Loki.
I don't want anybody out there to forget what you are. A cosmic mistake.
Until tragically, she discovered that she was a variant in the final episode. Then her mind was wiped and she ended up right back where she started. Again, the recurring theme of loops and circles. Later, we see her dressed as a doctor, implying that she will once again see variants of herself. Then we see the aftermath of Sylvie's decision in Loki's finale, the corpse of He Who Remains with the multiverse erupting behind him, and his palace is falling apart. Now, in that Quantumania post-credits scene, it looked like the Council of Kangs was meeting in this same place, the Citadel at the end of time, judging by all the different timelines around them. In fact, remember how the palace of He Who Remains was all like melded together with destroyed statues laying around? I think it's likely that He Who Remains created his palace out of the remains of the Kang Citadel after he won the Multiversal War. And this is where we see something very interesting. Mobius is wearing a spacesuit with a crack in it, which OB fixes with duct tape, just like they're all trying to apply a quick fix to the sacred timeline. And then Mobius heads out on a catwalk to see this junction point from the monitors that we saw earlier. This is where the sacred timeline starts to split into the multiverse. It also looks like the B-roll of a rope being woven together that we constantly use to show how the sacred timeline worked in that series, except now that rope is being unraveled at its end. So maybe in the show there's still time to reestablish the sacred timeline. Later we even see OB, Mobius, Loki, and Sylvie in some kind of control room holding this device, the same device that Mobius has on the catwalk. Now, just to hop around a bit in this trailer, this looks like the same device that Victor Timely used in his demonstration, a demonstration that produced this same visual of several timelines splitting off from a central point. So maybe they had to steal this device from Victor Timely and then use it to go fix the timeline. And maybe they had to infiltrate the Citadel of Kangs to get to this point. Our lead editor, Randolf Nombrado, also pointed out that now the sacred timeline is infused with different colored energy, as opposed to just the purple energy we've seen before. I think that Loki is tapping into this green energy when he fires his green energy bolts earlier in the trailer. And then we see Loki using a time controller to manipulate Brad Wolf, a nice reversal of how the TVA used this on him in the first season. Now, I have a feeling that we're going to see the TVA completely collapse and fade away this season. We see the monitor used to watch the sacred timelines fall down from the ceiling. Later in the trailer, Loki watches the lights go out across the TVA. And later, a car falls out of the sky and almost hits poor Casey. You know, this guy.
After all, got you like a fish, Casey.
What's a fish?
And afterwards, we see Casey in a gray jumpsuit on the run. Now, this could be one of his variants, or maybe the remaining members of the TVA are being hunted down by the Kang Council. Now, notice this shot of Loki entering the pie room, lots and lots and lots of circles on the ceiling of this circular room. This is Sylvie in the pie room, and notice that she is wearing an earring that is the symbol of an Ankh, an Egyptian glyph that means life. And here we see Sylvie in some kind of attic space, drawing her blade while someone on the floor is struggling. Now, later we see Ravonna Renslayer in this same space, so I'm betting this is Sylvie getting revenge, or trying to, on the woman who pruned her timeline. Now, in the comics, Ravonna Renslayer was the one true love of Kang the Conqueror. In the MCU, she was a judge at the TVA, and at the end of season 1, Ms. Minutes implied that she was bringing Ravonna to meet Free Will.
I know, but he thinks this'll be more useful.
The person who lives outside the control of the TVA. Now, this could be Kang, aka Victor Timely, and Miss Minutes could have been working for him all along. Now, this would explain why later in the trailer we see Ravonna over someone's body. Could be Victor Timely's body, as Miss Minutes goes kaiju mode and scares everyone away. And I love that she turns herself into the scariest thing she could think of, a ghost. And in this shot of the attic space workshop, notice all these clocks on the wall, telling me that this is likely the workshop of one Victor Timely. We even see Ravonna with a souped up steampunk gun that Victor could have invented. So if Victor turns out to be Kang the Conqueror stranded in the past, then I think it's likely that his machine is not a time travel machine, but rather a machine that controls time itself. And then we have this shot where the movie star is flanked by the shadows of Loki and Sylvie as their Loki horns grow from their heads. Now Loki's eyes glow like he's enchanting this guy, just as we see their shadows grab the movie star by the arms. Now, I don't think this is like a new power of Loki's to manipulate shadows, but he is enchanting this guy into making him think that the shadows have come to life. The graffiti in the alley reads "All men are brothers," and this reads "Don't let good homes become empty shells." Now, this could be set in the late 70s or early 80s when an economic crisis evicted people from their homes. Or maybe we're wrong and this takes place during the blip when millions of homes were suddenly left unoccupied. The title card reads "The timeline is running out." Again, maybe because the TVA is slowly being erased from existence. If that's happening, then maybe this line,
But how do you choose who lives and who dies?
maybe that line is referring to the idea that different variants will have to die for some others to live. Loki says,
War is on its way.
now he is talking about the Great Multiversal War. Miss Minutes taught us about this in season 1, the multiversal war between the Kang variants that nearly destroyed the multiverse, before He Who Remains erased the Kang Council from existence.
And I ended the multiversal war.
Now later we see Loki in front of a mural of this multiversal war, and next to that, the propaganda of the Timekeepers pruning the timelines into one sacred timeline. We will likely see this multiversal war come to a head in Avengers: The Kang Dynasty. And then we see Loki once again in his prison jumpsuit wearing his inhibitor collar. Now, this could be another variant of himself who has been arrested, or maybe because of time slipping, he is splitting off into multiple versions of himself, like Scott did in Quantumania. So what we're seeing here is more of a Loki in a road not taken. This monitor reads, "Thank you for your service," as it's disintegrating like it's in a probability storm, leading credence to the theory that the TVA is being erased. And then we see Ravonna in what looks like the void at the end of time, like maybe she is watching Eliath. After all, this light is purple, just like Eliath's energy. We see several shots of Loki and Sylvie fighting TVA agents in this warehouse as portals open up around them, and the sign in the background seems like a nod to Dan DeLaw, a visual effects supervisor and second unit director known for his work on MCU films. He is also going to direct a bunch of Loki season 2 episodes, his first time in the director chair. Congratulations. Now, this place could house a rival version of the TVA. Like maybe, since there are multiple Kangs, they have created a completely different version of the Time Variance Authority that is at war with one another. So maybe Loki's actual Mobius is still out there at the original TVA HQ we saw in season 1. And then there is a great title card reveal after Mobius calls him the God of Mischief.
Always have been. Always will be.
And then there's a button where Loki does the old duplication casting trick.
A little over the top, don't you think?
I thought it was spot on.
and as he falls through the TVA, he goes past a sign that seems to read timeline preservation, then I can't make out the bottom line. This could be a warning sign, reading timeline preservation impossible or something like that. Then we see a view from the top of the Ferris wheel from earlier and Loki landing in a lifeboat, similar to how he escaped the destruction of the sacred timeline like he was fleeing a sinking ship. And then we see the movie star trapped in the TVA, Loki chasing down the movie star after the premiere, and then Loki and Sylvie letting their powers combine like the Planeteers, just like they did to defeat Goliath in the finale. Now, I think the show is going to be the big setup for the next phase of the Multiverse Saga. Phase 4 was all about establishing the sacred timeline collapsing and seeing the results from that collapse. Multiple Spider-Men, Multiverse of Madness, What If. Now, Phase 5 has introduced Kang and the Council of Kangs, and the beginning of the Multiverse of War.
So let's stop wasting time.
As the Kangs begin to fight one another, only one will win. That is the Kang, the one we saw in Quantumania. And then it will be up to the Avengers to stop that Kang once and for all.
Maybe they could, like, I don't know, get some help from ants, because apparently that guy's big weakness is ants.
Exactly. Ants.
Ants. Ants. Ant-Man.
And just a reminder, everyone, to change your bad habits today, head to tryfum.com and use the code ScreenCrush to save an additional 10% off your order today. But let me know what you think of all this. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.